Could you just please double check by leaving a message in the chat if everything is working okay as expected, and then I will go ahead and start with the first game. How was everything, guys? All good? Okay, all looks good. What I will do is start off then. So we return back to Premier League action after another busy midweek of EFL Cup, of Europa League, and La Liga games. Fixtures are a bit congested now. Obviously, we're sort of settling in, getting used to 2 games every week, and we are still early in the season, so have to sort of bear that in mind. Have to be a bit careful. Thank you all for tuning in live. Massively appreciate your support, and I would like to encourage you all to leave your own bets. Sort of leave your views and opinions in the comment box. I'll be reading them live. Or if you're watching this as a video afterwards, again, feel free to leave your comments, and I'll happily sort of go through them. So this week, I'm a big fan of some of the matchups and some of the fixtures. So without wasting any time, the first game to cover is Newcastle against Man City. So Newcastle currently sitting sixth. They were dealt their first defeat of the season against Fulham in their previous game, in what was a pretty comprehensive loss. I think they were comfortably beaten in the end. It was 3-1. It was sort of categorized by mistakes, sort of lack of concentration. We saw Bruno Guimaraes break the sort of golden rule of football by passing across his own box to lead to the third and final goal. But they might take some sort of solace from the fact that they have no midweek game. They had their fixture against Wimbledon cancelled, so they've had the sort of rest advantage of a Man City in a sense. Coming into this game, they have pretty much a full contingent of players. Um, they sort of started off with a full injury list, and that's kind of decreased as the season's gone on. So the only real first teamer missing is probably Sven Botman. So I think Eddie Howe will be sort of confident going into this game with that in mind. For City, there's so much to unpack in regards to them. Uh, After their game against Arsenal, obviously they squeezed away with a point. Um, Again, we'll sort of talk more in the preview about them, but they will be without Rodri for this game. That's the sort of most notable change, which is again something to consider going into this one. So for me, the first bet that I've got is probably a controversial one. If you are watching, don't click off, but I'm gonna give my reasoning for Newcastle with a +1 handicap, which is priced at 1.9 with Bet365. So how this bet works is if Newcastle draw or win by any amount, this bet will be a winner. If Newcastle win or if Newcastle lose, sorry, by 1 goal exactly, the bet will void. And if Newcastle lose by two or more goals, this bet will lose. So essentially, we need Newcastle to draw. That would be an ideal situation for us. But the thinking basically comes one being Rodri's out, and he has been out for the start of the season already. And City have been all right with him. They've been all right without him. Sorry. Um, but if we look into their results last season, they were without him for 4 games, and that was a 5-1 win to Luton, a 1-0 loss to Aston Villa, and um, a 1-0 loss to Arsenal, and a 2-0 loss to Wolves. So they can be vulnerable whenever they don't sort of have their main man in midfield. They lack a bit of control. And St James's Park is not an easy place to visit. What I'll just quickly do is I'll show you Newcastle's home record over the last 50 games. And I think one thing to bear in mind is last season they had a lot of injuries and they had a very congested fixture schedule, which made the season very difficult for them. I think for this season coming up, it's a bit different in the sense that I've obviously shown the injury report. and it's not as bad as last season, and they only really have to contend with domestic fixtures, which I think is beneficial for them. But if we do look into their home record last season, they only lost by more than one goal on one occasion, and that was against Nottingham Forest, where they lost 3-1. So apart from that, they had a pretty decent record against Man City. I think they lost 3-2 in the league, and they beat them in the EFL Cup. So I think in a worst case scenario based off that, we're sort of looking at Newcastle to lose by exactly one goal, which would be a void, which again isn't the worst thing in the world. But when you consider that Rodri is out, I think they have more of a chance than the market's giving them. And I like that sort of Asia handicap line. Based on a sort of similar line of thought, another potential angle, if you're a bit more sort of risk averse, would be backing Newcastle shots. Um, you can get Abdi. Oh yeah, is that Ezalzuli for today? Yes. So who is that with? Sorry, Pedivera. What bookmaker is that with? Um, but yeah, going back to Newcastle, you can back over 9.5 shots at 1.83 with Bet365. And it's again on a similar line of thought that without Rodri, City will sort of lack that control. And whenever City do visit St James's Park, we typically see Eddie Howe play a bit more aggressive. He wants to get at them, and I think that will sort of be highlighted when we've seen that over the last season in the last two games. Newcastle aren't really a high possession based side. I think they will see like maybe 20 to 40% sort of in that range of possession, but they do have the potential to play on the break. They've got Harvey Barnes in really good form, Anthony Gordon obviously who has the sort of pace to cause problems in behind, and Alexander Isak who, in my opinion, is one of the best strikers in the league. So I think maybe the shot line is a bit too high at 9.5. I would have liked if it was sort of backable at over 8.5 or 7.5. 9.5 is a bit of a stretch, but I think it's likely we get a decent game state for Newcastle shots. An alternative one to that would be over 3.5 shots on target for Newcastle, which has landed in the last three head-to-head games at St James's Park. And I think Newcastle aren't really the team to sort of pop up long shots. They create higher quality chances, which in turn should lead to more shots on target, or their shot on target percentage would be pretty high. Moving on to angle three, this is quite an interesting one, and it's sort of based on again the head-to-head data between the two sides. And I alluded to the fact that Eddie Howe sort of likes to play a high pressing game, and that leads itself to sort of back the two midfielders to make fouls. If we look at Joe Linton and Bruno Guimaraes against Man City, this is their foul data from player stats. It's pretty ridiculous. You can see Bruno Guimaraes has played against Man City 7 times and received 6 bookings. Similarly, Joe Linton he missed the two league games last season, but you can see his foul record is ridiculous. He's making two or more fouls in the last 6 consecutive head-to-head games. So I mean, if Newcastle are going to press high, those two are the people to target. Joe Linton is very short for fouls. I think he's 1.61 top price for 2 fouls. Obviously very short, not backable as a single. But Bruno Guimaraes is currently 2.25, I believe, with Sky to make 2 fouls, which, based on the head-to-head data, looks really good. In addition, you could also back a card. So Bruno Guimaraes is just short of 2-1 to be carded. Obviously, I wouldn't say that's great value, but with Paddy Power, you can get him for 3.3, which I think is decent. I think that's a solid bet. Again, based on the head-to-head data rather than season data. Um, Joe Linton is actually slightly longer for a card. Again, it's Paddy Power at top price. So I think if you're looking for fouls, stick with Guimaraes because Joe Linton is a bit short. But if you're looking for cards, Paddy Power is the place to be, and I think that's a good shout for these two. Again, the prices are a bit short, so a sort of alternative angle you could go for is looking into the City players who can be fouled, and the one that stands out for me is Kovacic. So he is currently priced 1.67 with Sky to draw one or more fouls, which on the surface, if Newcastle are to play a high press with the likes of Joe Linton and Bruno Guimaraes, Kovacic is a natural target for fouls drawn. He'll sort of be in midfield, similar sort of zone. So that price stands out as being really good value. On a similar sort of note, Bernardo Silva is 1.73 to draw one foul, which again looks pretty good value. But his data isn't as good as Kovacic. So if we look into the fouls drawn data, again we'll stick to head-to-head games because Newcastle is sort of unique in their approach against City over the last season or so. We can see Kovacic, we actually have a decent bit of data to go off because Kovacic has started the last four games and he's drawn a foul in three of those. The only one he didn't draw a foul was the EFL Cup, and he was substituted after 68 minutes. So you'd assume he plays the 90 here. Every time he has played the 90 against Newcastle in a City shirt, he's drawn a foul. So 1.67 looks good price based on that. When you also have a look at Rodri, you can see he's averaging 2.07 fouls drawn per 90 against Newcastle. You think Kovacic will sort of emulate the Rodri role in this game without the Spaniard. And you can see Rodri's drawn at least one foul in each of his last three. So every game last season he played against Man City, he drew a foul. Um, Again, 1.67, probably a bit too short to back as a single, I know for most of you. So you could pair that with a Guimaraes foul, and that comes out at 2.1. So odds against for that, I think is a really, really nice price. I think that's probably one of the better prices of the weekend, in my opinion. I've mentioned quite a lot of sort of angles and leans in this game. Probably worth noting that don't want to go too heavy. I think, um, as I mentioned, without Rodri, sort of becomes a bit more difficult to predict the game. In addition, um, it's an early kickoff. It's the first game of the weekend, 12:30 kickoff at St James's Park. I'm not really a big fan of backing early kickoffs, but I'm not entirely sure how that will affect sort of how Newcastle press or things like that. So I think it's just something to bear in mind. I think to play it safe, I would probably sort of target odds against bets and sort of reduce your stake. But with that in mind, I really like some of the angles here, especially the cards and fouls bets. So, moving on to the next game, which is Arsenal against Leicester, which is a 3 o'clock kickoff at the Emirates. Just before I move on, did you check out the Chelsea offsides? I will be having a look at that today. So I haven't covered Chelsea offsides in this video or in this stream, but I'll cover that separately. I think it's a pretty decent matchup actually. And I'll be posting about it on Twitter. But I'll get back to you. Bookmaker this to you. Yeah, I think so. I posted. For those that don't know, I posted a bet on Betis against Las Palmas today, backing Lo Celso to have over 1.5 shots, which is at evens, or 1.9, sorry, shortened a bit, and Ezal Zuli to also have over 2.5 shots at 1.72. I think that's fantastic value. In the comments, we're just saying that you can get over 0.5 shots on target for 2.02. Yeah, I think that's really good. I think with Ezal Zuli, he's a right-footed left winger, and he's generally very accurate with his shots. He scored so this season he scored a brace. In the last game, he had 4 shots, none were on target, but he did hit the post. I think it was pretty unlucky that he didn't have a shot on target. So I really like that to be again odds against. I think it's a nice price. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. For those that haven't gone, I assume if you're in the UK, I'm not sure if Risk Bookmaker is available, but top price I believe was Paddy Power for those in the UK. I haven't seen my tweet yet. So yeah, moving on to Arsenal against Leicester, 3 o'clock kickoff at the Emirates. Um, Arsenal were desperately unlucky not to leave the Etihad with 3 points in their last game in what was a perhaps unexpectedly memorable game. I think I was sort of convinced it would be a 0-0. Obviously, it didn't play out like that. That happens, and we sort of learn for the season. Um, but I think it's important to consider that. I think the manner in which Arsenal lost, I think, will sort of galvanize them. I think it was obviously with all like the arguments and stuff afterwards, and then you've got sort of complaints from people about their dark arts. I think it kind of feels like when everyone is against you, it sort of gives you that extra motivation. At least we sort of saw that with sort of Liverpool over the last few seasons. Whenever it seems like everything is going against you, that's when you sort of saw the best from them. And I think Arteta might sort of look to galvanize his squad in a similar way. I think over the next few games, I think we'll see a lot more of things like celebrating block shots, things like that, like just minor things that Arsenal tend to do, which is pretty frustrating to watch as an as a as an opponent. But if you're a fan of Arsenal, I can imagine it's pretty great. For Leicester, they are still yet to register a win. We're still sort of seeing them adapt under Steve Cooper. They heavily rotated midweek and edged past Walsall on penalties, so they're not really looking completely confident in the league so far. Um, it's worth noting that Fatu played the full 90 against Walsall, which probably suggests he won't start against Arsenal. Most likely, we see a trio of Vardy, Mavididi, and Jordan Ayew, which is what we saw in their previous league game. Again, more on that later. For Arsenal, they've got an interesting injury report. So yesterday they had quite a lot of players listed on it. A few of those have now gone because obviously they had quite a few injury sort of issues in the City game. Calafiori was on the injury list, but he started in the midweek game, so he should be sort of fit to play. David Raya is also no longer listed. Neither is Julian Timber. So I think with Arsenal, there's quite a lot of uncertainty with how they line up, especially at the left back position, or which is a sort of position of interest for me this game. More on that later. With Arsenal so far, I think the trend has been backing sort of Arsenal to keep a clean sheet and Saliba duels, because obviously we've seen the switch between Gabriel and Saliba. Backing Saliba to have fouls and tackles has been priced sort of massive so far, whereas Gabriel has been priced quite big, but you'd be more focused on the unders. In my opinion, this is a slight banana skin fixture in terms of those stats. Going into the clean sheets bit, Arsenal have kept 4 clean sheets in 7 games, so we're sort of going against the grain with this pick, which is both teams to score at 2.2. Um, Reason being, I think David Raya has probably been the best player for Arsenal so far. I think if they were to give out a Player of the Season award now, it would go to him. I think he's been incredible. Some of the saves he's pulled off, like fantastic, and he's a massive reason that Arsenal have kept so many clean sheets. I think replace him with an average keeper, and Arsenal's results don't look anywhere near as good as they are. If we look into the XG conceded this season, you can see they've conceded at least one XG in 4 of their 7 games. Um, but yeah, we see 0.66 XG conceded against Wolves, uh, 1 XG against Villa, 1.4 XG against Brighton, 0.94 against Spurs. So you see, in a lot of games, they're actually losing the XG battle. We'll obviously exclude the one against Bolton because they sort of had the massive supremacy, but they haven't been entirely watertight. Is the point I'm trying to make, and I think they are due to concede. I think Leicester actually provide a really nice matchup, and I think they have the sort of capabilities to really cause problems for Arsenal on the break. We've seen obviously Vardy this season so far. He's looked all right. He obviously isn't really the striker you want. I think if you're a promoted side, but he's performed pretty well. Obviously scored against Spurs, and I think yeah, Leicester obviously going to sort of set up in a deep block. It's Steve Cooper as manager and play on the break. And I think they definitely have the tools to cause Arsenal problems in playing that way, especially with Mavididi and Vardy. Leicester have scored in every game so far, which I think again bodes well, and Arsenal are just due to concede. 2.2, both teams to score, I think looks a bit inflated. I wouldn't expect that to be odds against, so I really like that. Really like that price as the first one. If we sort of circle back and go to what Leicester's predicted lineup will be, it will likely be Mavididi on the left, Vardy up front, and Jordan Ayew as a right winger. Um, I think that's the trio that's starting against against Everton, and they got a point from that game. None of them started against Walsall midweek, so you would logically expect that to be the trio. Um, and I think with that, if we sort of allude back to Saliba Jules, going back to going back to Vardy, he's a player who will play on the shoulder. He'll look to get in behind. He's not a player who sort of holds up the ball. And I think because of that, it doesn't really make sense to back Saliba to be in Jules. I don't think it's the right sort of scenario. I think we'll see a lot of runs in behind from Vardy, so a lot of chasing. So a potential alternative could be Vardy offside, which has landed in 3 out of 5 league games this season, including 3 offsides against Fulham. He's priced at 2.25 to register an offside, which is probably around a fair price, I would say, maybe a bit too short even. But I think with the matchup, I think obviously Leicester won't see much of the ball. He'll be relied on as a sort of outlet. Arsenal don't play a particularly high line, but I just like the matchup for this one. The data doesn't really sort of point to an offside for Vardy, but again, just the matchup. For me, the best sort of angle is to do with Jordan Ayew. Um, I mentioned him a lot last season. He's a player who's very adept at sort of inviting contact and going down very easily. He's a good player for drawing fouls. Um, so for me, my initial instinct would be to back Jordan Ayew fouls drawn. But it's a bit too short for my liking against a team like Arsenal who don't commit too many fouls. He's best priced with Paddy Power, 2.4 to draw 3 fouls, which is again not ideal. If 2 fouls drawn was backable, I'd be all over that in an instant. But we just don't really get the right market, so we have to be a bit more creative with this one. I think we're sort of looking at if he's going to operate in the sort of right wing zone for Leicester, who will he find duels against? And it'll be whoever Arsenal play at left back. It'll probably be Declan Rice, and it'll likely be Martinelli. So I think a strategy for me will be to sort of wait for the player matchup foul bets. I think if we're getting sort of Declan Rice to foul Ayew or Martinelli to foul Ayew, I think those are quite good markers to bet on. I do think there's a lot of uncertainty around who starts at left back for Arsenal. Obviously, we've seen Julian Timber start there for the most of the season, but Calafiori started at left back against City, so quite a bit of uncertainty in that regard. Um, could be worth waiting for lineups. In my opinion, Timber starts at left back, which is a great matchup, by the way. If it is Timber against Ayew, I'd sort of be inclined to lean towards Timber 2 fouls. I know 1 foul is very short, but Timber 2 fouls could be a nice angle to approach this one. Yeah, I would say Timber starts as well. Ben White over 0.5 shots. I'm not sure about Ben White. I took him a few times last season. I think you normally find his price at odds against, which is obviously ideal. I think it's a similar story to Tarek Mitchell. I mentioned this last week, and Tarek Mitchell is a massive banana skin for shots because his data is really good, but whenever you watch him, he just doesn't really get in any good positions to shoot. And I think a lot of his sort of shots are arising from sort of just the randomness. Obviously that is normal in football, so you want to target a player as close to goal as possible for shots. In a similar vein to Ben White, he stays very wide. He doesn't really break into the box as much. He doesn't invert. That's sort of what Saka does. So he very rarely gets into the box in open play. I think there should be enough opportunities for him to shoot from things like corners or just because Leicester are going to sit deep. He'll have sort of opportunity to get into the box at times, but I think in most scenarios he won't really position himself in a good place to shoot. Um, so I'd be wary. I think you'd only really want to back him if if you can be convinced that Arsenal will go for like the win for the entire 90 minutes. What I mean by that is if it's 2-0 Arsenal after 20 minutes, your bet's likely finished in the sense that it'll just sort of the game will just sort of die out, be quite low energy. Um, whereas I think last season where I found a bit of success was against Porto when Arsenal were down on aggregate. They were sort of chasing the game for the entire 90. In that scenario, it's probably a better position to sort of back centre backs and defenders for shots, just because you have that desperation factor. That will be it for all the angles in this game. I appreciate I've sort of sat on the fence with a lot of them. I haven't really been too sure of anything, but it's because of their lineups. There's a lot of uncertainty for Arsenal. My personal opinion would probably be the both teams to score. I think that's really the best price. Again, with this kind of game, when there's quite a lot of uncertainty, you'd rather go for sort of odds against angles and reduce your stakes. So third game is the 5:30 kickoff Wolves against Liverpool at Molineux. Another team who have been completely unconvincing to start the campaign is Wolves. They've got four draws and one loss. The way in which they've lost their games as well has been really disappointing, I would say. If we think back to the last two league games, they took the lead, sat back, and just sort of lost all attacking impotence, and it worked massively to their detriment. I'm not sure why they would sort of do that, and they just sort of conceded late, went out with a whimper, really. It's been three consecutive losses in all competitions for them, considering they lost to Brighton in between the two league games. So I can't imagine they're too full of confidence with this game. Um, Liverpool, on the other hand, have bounced back strongly after their defeat to Forest at home. They put together a dominating performance against AC Milan in the Champions League before a 3-0 win over Bournemouth, which saw Darwin Núñez obviously mark his first league start with a fantastic goal. Um, Bournemouth, I think, notably were able to find a lot of success. They had 19 shots, I believe, forced Kelleher into seven saves, which suggests that the scoreline maybe doesn't tell the full story. Um, and Liverpool weren't as watertight as the 3-0 score suggests. On the injury report, for Wolves, they are likely to be without Mosquera, who is a potential ACL victim, which likely rules him out for the season, which means we could see a defensive partnership of Craig Dawson and Santiago Bueno, which is not ideal at all for Gary O'Neill. For Liverpool, no real changes. Um, Harvey Elliott remains sort of long-term absentee with a foot injury, while Allison is also likely to remain out for this game. But Liverpool have more than capable sort of replacement in Kelleher, so that's not really a massive worry for them. Main angle for me in this game is for Andre of Wolves to draw two fouls, which is priced at 2.0 with paddy power. So Andre got his first start for Wolves against Newcastle, in which he drew two fouls in a 77-minute appearance before being withdrawn with what looked like fatigue. Then he was rewarded with a start against Villa, in which he drew four fouls in a more stable role as a defensive midfielder. So he had Lamina and João Gomez in front of him. He played defensive midfielder and played the entire 90. Again, I thought he looked really good so far. I think he's looked confident, settled in nicely. So we could be looking at another 90-minute performance here. In terms of his fouls drawn, he's obviously drawn an average of three fouls per game in the league so far, which is decent, but it's a very small sample size to go off. So if we look back to his time at Fluminense, in the 2024 season, he had 2.2 fouls drawn per 90, which again, really solid. Over the course of his career, he's averaging 1.8 fouls drawn per 90, of course, in a different league for most of it, but still pretty big numbers, which is even more interesting when you consider they're doing an uptick in sort of recent years. I think more than that, he draws an ideal matchup against the Liverpool midfield. Obviously, the one constant from Klopp to Arne Slot has been the sort of high pressing nature of which Liverpool play, and a lot of their fouls are concentrated in midfield. Um, Szoboszlai, Gravenberch, and McAllister all expected to start against Wolves, who are the sort of main contributors and have registered the most fouls for Liverpool so far, which is really good considering they all sort of occupy a very similar zone to Andre in this game. So, as I say, 2.0 looks really good based on that. Data looks good, matchup looks good. and this same bet is 1.5 with Sky. So I think that's again suggestive of good value. Angle two is for Trent to make two or more tackles. Um, not not a bet that was particularly uh, common last season, considering obviously Trent is a right back. But we've seen a slight shift in his role under Arne Slot, and it's basically him playing a bit more defensively, which has worked to his sort of detriment going forward. But it has led to an uptick in tackles. So he blanked against Ipswich from tackles, zero tackles in his first game in the league. But since then, he's made two tackles against Brentford, three against United, four against Forest, three against AC Milan, and four against Bournemouth. So hitting at least two tackles pretty comfortably, um, which makes a sort of 2.0 price for two tackles on Bet365 look very good value. Um, Obviously, he hasn't played the full 90 in four of those games, but there's a chance he actually gets at this game because Connor Bradley, who has been his replacement, played the full 90 against West Ham midweek. So and Trent didn't play at all. So we could see Trent with the full 90 here, which would obviously be ideal. When he has played the full 90 this season, he's hit four tackles against Forest, four tackles against Bournemouth. So obviously that looks quite good. Again, to mention the matchup against Wolves, I think it looks really good. Um, Opposition right backs have made at least two tackles in 5 out of 6 games so far against Premier League opponents. The only person to fail was Ben White, so obviously not a player who has a ridiculously high average of tackles. We're likely to see Velegard play on the left wing in this game. Um, but it's more than just like a player to player matchup. I think with the way Wolves play, we obviously see Aït get forward quite a lot. We also see Matheus Cunha drift over to the left at times as well. He sort of biases his play to the left. So we should see Trent find duels against those three players: Cunha, Bellegarde, Aït, and all three are really good for tackles in my opinion because they are players who often dribble with the ball. They sort of look to beat their man, and in turn have quite good dispossessed data. And that sort of led to how opposition right backs have been registering tackles against Wolves. So again, it's a good matchup. It's landed in 5 straight games, and it's priced at evens. It's as short as 1.44 with Sky. So again, I think that's really good value. If Trent can get the 90, really good chance he makes at least two tackles in this game. Moving on to a couple of leans. Those two are the bets that I've really liked this game. I've got a few more sort of potential angles that maybe need a bit more looking into, maybe to consider some more disconfirming evidence before going for them. But I also really like Gravenberch and McAllister fouls, which sort of is linked to the Andre fouls drawn. Obviously, I mentioned Liverpool are committing the majority of their fouls in midfield with their high press, and it's these two players that have been the main contributors in the double pivot. I think with the way Liverpool press as well, it's sort of they sort of filter play out wide for the opponent to sort of trap themselves and then find a duel with either McAllister or Gravenberch, two players who are very adept at winning the ball back and very strong in duels. So, as with last season, we see these two players in a lot of physical battles. And I think when you're against players that Wolves have, namely Matheus Cunha, as mentioned, Andre, João Gomez, Bellegarde, they're all very technical players, good at dribbling, and I think naturally will draw fouls, especially with the way Wolves play, in the sense that they'll likely sit deep and then look to progress the ball through carries as opposed to like a long ball. If we look into if we look a bit deeper into the fouls drawn data from Gravenberch and McAllister so far, we've seen both players have made at least one foul in every game, and McAllister has made two fouls or more in 3 out of 6 in all competitions. Gravenberch in also in 3 out of 6 in all competitions. So looks decent on the surface. I think the matchup against Wolves is probably slightly better than average, which makes me think two fouls is a good play for both. Um, so yeah, I like those two. In terms of the prices, McAllister for two fouls is 1.83, think priced the same on 365 as Paddy Power. Birch is 2.25 for 2 fouls. I think his price sort of stands out a bit more um, because you'd sort of expect the two players to be similar. Birch has obviously made more fouls in the league so far, but he plays an identical role to McAllister and will find sort of the same matchup, the same duels, and he plays with the same intensity. So I like the value on offer for Birch. I think it should be close to 1.83. Um, Again, just a lean for now, but good matchup, good data to support it. So I like it. That will be it for the Wolves Liverpool game. I think quite a few decent angles in that one. Moving on to Man United against Tottenham, probably the biggest game of the weekend. 4:30 kickoff on Sunday at Old Trafford. The two teams are currently only separated by goal difference. Man United most recently played out a 0-0 stalemate against Palace, in which Lisandro Martinez was very lucky to stay on. So he'll come into this game, he'll probably start. Um, but I think for United on the whole, they've been a much improved side and deserve a lot of credit, especially Ten Hag. I think he was very quick to sort of get his criticism last season, but he has improved. Has improved a lot. I think that's reflected more in the underlying numbers than actual results. So I think a sort of regression is due for them, and we will talk about that more in a bit. For Spurs, they recently eased past a depleted Brentford side after conceding with the first shot of the game. I thought they looked really, really solid going forward. They created 3.52 XG. They were, as expected, totally dominant in that game. 7 big chances, and in all honesty, it should have been a lot more. Solanke scored, but he missed 3 big chances, so massively involved in the attacking third. Um, on the injury report, it's a sort of similar story as Newcastle for Spurs, in the sense that they've got players returning from injury as opposed to getting injured, so they're almost at a full contingent. It's only really Richarlison and Odegaard on the injury report, so nothing too major for them, nothing they can't really deal with. Solanke returned from injury. He was on the injury list, but he returned in the last game, played 88 minutes. He hasn't really looked fully up to speed, but he's had a sort of enough time to recover. He played 88 minutes against Brentford, so you would imagine his sort of fitness levels are as high as it could be. First angle for me is in regards to Solanke, actually, and it's for him to have 2 shots and 1 shot on target, which is priced at 1.8 with Bet365. Ideally, it's probably best to wait for the Carabao game this evening to see how Spurs might line up, but I've made the assumption that Solanke either doesn't play or is substituted early in sort of preparation for this game. With Richarlison being out, don't really see the need to risk him, especially as Spurs are massive, massive favourites. So I've assumed that Solanke starts against Man United, and we haven't really seen much of him in a Spurs shirt, so that's something to consider in the sense that it's a very small sample size. But the sort of main focus is the system that he plays in, and I think it sort of caters to his strengths. And you can sort of make the analogy between Solanke for Spurs and Artem Dovbyk of Girona last season. I think you could draw a lot of parallels between the two because the Girona system sort of relied on Dovbyk to not contribute at all in terms of creating chances. It was just to play on the shoulder, get into good high XG positions, and score goals. And I think Solanke's playing in an identical system. He doesn't really need to sort of drop deep and link. He just has to get into good positions, stay in the box, and be ready for the shot or be ready to shoot or to receive from a cross or pass or cutback. Against Leicester, he had 3 shots, all 3 on target, perhaps to perfectly exemplify that point. The fact that when he does get a chance, he might not get too many chances, but when he does get them, it'll be of a high quality nature, and it's sort of likely that it'll be on target. He then had 2 shots, none on target against Arsenal, but he had good chances. The ball broke to him a few times. He was very close on a couple of occasions. Again, it's worth mentioning that Arsenal is probably the toughest matchup for shots in the league. Even though Spurs did have 15, they sort of were limited to the lower XG shots, and Solanke was naturally not as involved in that respect. I think Man United are a much better matchup than Arsenal, obviously. Solanke also got his first goal against Brentford, which should fill him with confidence. And again, in that game, four shots, three big chances missed, one goal, three on target. So the nature of his chances, they're good. They're very good chances, and because of that, I'd sort of want to back his shot on target markets as opposed to shots. I think that's more interesting. And for this, I think Son is priced at 1.5 for a shot on target. But since he's been playing left wing, he's just not really in the right positions to shoot. Looking into his data again, when he's played on the left wing, he's had exactly one shot in every game, and the one shot against Arsenal was, if I remember correctly, it was in injury time, and it was from about 40 yards out. So he's just not really in the right positions. The only game he scored was when he played as the centre forward. Three shots, three on target, two goals. Again, to exemplify the fact that Spurs' system caters perfectly to provide the centre forward with chances, which in this game will hopefully be Solanke. I think this game lends itself to be quite open and chaotic at times. Both sides like to press; they'll sort of be aggressive in their approach play, and I think one of the main sort of points of interest for me is the tackles markets. Um, if we look into the FBref data, we can see that Man United have made the fourth most tackles in the league so far, and Spurs rank sixth. Spurs have also drawn the fourth most tackles in the league, and Man United rank fourth. So as it stands, uh, Tottenham have the lowest PPDA value in the entire league, which again highlights how they press high, they press strongly, they don't allow their opponents to sort of settle on the ball. And I think that lends itself again to a chaotic game, which is good for backing tackles, fouls, and drills in general. Um, More on that in a bit, because for me, the second angle of interest, or not the second, sorry, the third angle of interest is for Kulusevski to draw a foul. We've obviously seen a tactical shift this season where Ange Postecoglou he doesn't play two holding midfielders. We've only seen either Bentancur or Bissouma play. I think it's likely we see Bentancur start this game because believe Bissouma has an injury or a slight knock. So um, yeah, I believe Bentancur starts this game alongside Madison and Kulusevski in midfield. Since Kulusevski has made the shift to midfield, he's drawn a foul in three out of four starts, only failing against Brentford. But in that game, it's worth noting that Brentford again sat back really deep, looked to just kind of defend their box, and they're generally just not a very good team to back duels. They're quite passive in their approach. They don't draw many tackles, they don't make many tackles, and they don't make any fouls either. Again, being so deep, Kulusevski wasn't really in the right position to draw fouls in that game. If you think he's sort of in and around the edge of the box, getting into the box, it's not really a position where you want to concede a free kick if you're Brentford. Not really a position where you can afford to. But against Man United, that will be completely different. Obviously, Man United are at home. I think they'll see most of the ball, even though Spurs are a possession-based side. I think Man United are as well. And being at home, I think, gives them a slight advantage in this one. Um, I think naturally that puts sort of Kulusevski's average position in and around the halfway line, central zone of the pitch, as opposed to the attacking third, which is a much better place to draw fouls and to find duels. And as a sort of additional point, it's worth mentioning that Kobe Mainoo has made the most fouls for Man United this season in midfield, as he sort of adapts to a more intense pressing style. He's made 10 fouls, averaging two fouls per game, and has been booked three times. So, an interesting one there, considering he should be the sort of primary man that Kulusevski matches up against. So, 1.83 to draw a foul with Paddy Power, looks a really nice price. again priced 1.44 with Sky, which is again indicative of good value. Another point, it's probably worth waiting for the foul matchup actually, because if Manu is to if he is to be priced to foul Kozlowski, it should be pretty decent, and I really like that matchup. So if we can get sort of 2-1 or thereabouts, could be one to play. So I'll keep an eye on that and be posting that uh, if it is released as a market. Another angle for me, this is quite sort of heavy lean, and it's for Delict to have a shot, which is currently priced at 1.83 with Bet365. So Delict has started 3 games this season, all league games. His first start was against Liverpool in the league, in which he was subbed after 69 minutes without taking a shot. But obviously, very, very tough matchup. First of all, because Man United only had 8 shots in total. Second, because Liverpool are a fantastic team at defending set pieces, very, very physical. So naturally, especially given that De Ligt didn't even finish the 90, I think we can sort of ignore that game. So after that, he had 2 shots, both on target and a goal against Southampton. And then in his most recent league game appearance, he had 3 shots, 3 on target uh, against Crystal Palace away, which is not an easy matchup, not a hard matchup either. I think if we're sort of looking at last season, Palace are a very, very tough matchup for centre back shots because they're a physical side. But since they've lost Anderson, they just don't really seem to be the same team. They look a bit vulnerable defensively, especially from set pieces. Southampton are also one of the worst teams at defending set pieces, which is sort of worth noting here. Um, so I think the Ligt stats are a bit exaggerated in that sense. Again, just worth considering, worth pointing out. That sort of explains why his numbers are a bit high. But Spurs also sort of fall into that category of being a team that are poor at defending set pieces. And I mentioned it last week against Brentford. Obviously, it didn't pay off, but that doesn't mean it was a bad value bet. Still think it was a great find. I think it should have been shorter than it was. And this price is another one that stands out. I'm happy to sort of go for it again because the research still applies. Um, so the data looks good. Tottenham are are a good matchup to target shots, and that's because if we sort of think into that, their predicted 11, only really Christian Romero is a player who is sort of physical, is aggressive. I think, especially because Spurs don't play 2 defensive midfielders. They are just generally quite a small and not a very physical side. And I think that is something that Man United could look to take advantage of. Brentford in the last game against Spurs only had 4 corners, so there maybe wasn't enough opportunities in that game. But at Old Trafford, I think there should be plenty more than we saw Brentford have. Um, and it's also quite sort of interesting that all of his 5 shots have been on target. So if we have a look into what the market's offering, Bet365 are the top price here for shots and shots on target. So I think there is long shot potential. If one shot is 1.83 back ball as a single, how can we sort of play around with that, find some long shots? And I think for me, the best sort of way to approach this is to go for one shot at 1.83, shot on target at 3-1, 2 shots is 4-1, and 2 shots on target is 20-1 for the long shot sort of lovers. And considering it's landed in his last 2 league games, now against Spurs team who are poor from set pieces, I think the 20-1 long shot really does have a chance, especially in the right sort of game state. If we see Spurs take the lead into the second half, I think that's got a really, really good chance. And 20-1 looks pretty massive based on the circumstances. What do you think of Bruno Guimaraes to foul? Yeah. Um. What? Oh, is that a foul matchup? Because if it is, I quite like it. I'd probably lean towards the sort of less risky option of Guimaraes to commit a foul, Kovacic to be fouled, which is odds against. But if that is a foul matchup, I think it's worth a play. I think 4-1 is pretty decent. Can just see Kovacic being fouled by maybe Joe Linton or just someone else. But I do like that, really like that. Thank you for sharing. Final angle for me in this game um, is Spurs tackles. Obviously, I mentioned it at the start that both teams sort of press high. They have good data for tackles, but the Spurs tackle line is a bit shorter than I expected actually. So I think we can sort of look to take advantage of that. Man United have drawn 20 tackles or more in 3 out of 5 league games, with their only miss being against Brighton, in which they drew 18 tackles, and Southampton, where they drew 19 tackles. So they're going close, all going well over. So 1.72 for Spurs to make 20 tackles is a price I like. It stands out straight away. And it gets even better considering Spurs have made at least 20 tackles in 5 out of 6 in all competitions this season. They failed only against Brentford, but I've alluded to it quite a few times. Brentford play very low possession, deep block, don't see much of the ball, and they just don't incite very many duels. So we can sort of, to an extent, ignore that matchup. This one against Man United should be much better, much more evenly contested. We should see Man United have much more of the ball, and therefore tackles are a natural target. Again, we said Spurs have the lowest PPDA in the league, which basically means they're the most intense pressing team. So, as I say, tackles are just a really good option, I think, in this game. I would have expected the sort of line to be around 22 or 21. So getting this at 20 is pretty nice price and there's good value there and could potentially shorten. Final game I will cover is Monday Night Football on the South Coast, 8 p.m. Bournemouth against Southampton. Um, I think with this one, it's worth noting that obviously this is being recorded on Thursday. Game was on Monday, so these will be more leans than locks. We haven't really got full markets for a lot of books, so it's worth noting that. What I will do, however, is keep an eye on when markets are released, and I'll be posting a pretty comprehensive thread on this game. I think it's a really nice matchup, some good angles to take advantage of even now. But as you know, I prefer to sort of wait closer to kickoff, safer for accounts. Um, but yeah, I'll go through some good leans so far in this game. So first of all, Bournemouth. They recently lost 3-0 to Liverpool, and before that lost 1-0 to Chelsea. So back-to-back defeats after what was a pretty strong start to the season. However, it's worth noting that their performances have been much better than the results suggest. Against Liverpool, obviously you mentioned before, they had 19 shots, they forced 7 saves from Kelleher, so could have been a very different storyline. They obviously had the first goal of the game disallowed as well to Semenyo. So yeah, could have been very different. I thought they were impressive against Chelsea as well. They're very good at creating shots from sort of counter-attacking opportunities. They're very efficient on the break, and I think coming into this game against Southampton, they should be really, really confident, especially given that their South Coast neighbours are currently yet to win since their promotion. And I think worryingly for them, if you are a Saints fan, we're starting to see sort of Plan B, Plan C, Plan D come into fruition for Russell Martin, which is, I think, for me, suggestive that his time with the Reigns is sort of drawing to a close. They did, however, get their first point of the season against Ipswich and were denied all three by a late Sam Morsy strike. Southampton sort of posted a very different lineup in that game, which makes me a little skeptical of this one. But I think it will be interesting to see whether Russell Martin sort of sticks with the same team that got him that point. For me, I'm not convinced, so I sort of want to wait a bit more for information. In terms of the injury report, only Tyler Adams is out for Bournemouth, so they're basically boasting a full contingent. Southampton are obviously a bit harder to predict. They don't have a massive injury report, but we have seen rotation in the last couple of weeks, so they are a team to keep an eye on. Again, as I say, Monday kickoff. So we don't get markets for Paddy Power or Sky yet, or we don't have them available yet. Bet365 are available though, and there are some early prices that stand out for me. First of all, Taylor Harwood Bellis to make a foul. Um, he's obviously struggled a bit um, with the step up to the Premier League, and that's been reflected in his fouls data. But he did look a lot more composed in his previous game, it must be noted. Um, I was impressed by him actually in terms of how he plays on the ball. I think operating in a back four, he's a lot more naturally going to be a lot more exposed. He can't really afford to make a mistake in that position, but I thought he was all right. Contested a tough matchup with Liam Delap and made four fouls, I believe, in that game. And he's currently priced at 1.8 to commit a foul with 365. Probably worth noting that Paddy Power are usually top price in that market or have been over the course of the season so far. So could potentially be worth waiting for them, see if they open any higher. But I already think 1.8 is good value if you're looking for something right now. Next sort of lean is Bournemouth shots, which is a market I've been interested in all season. I think I've been very impressed with how Bournemouth have played. As I said, the results might not have been positive in the last two games, but that doesn't mean performances have been poor as well. 19 shots against Liverpool, 19 shots against Chelsea, which is again pretty impressive numbers against two opponents who've started the season in really good form. Uh, I haven't had a look into the shot lines just yet, but my focus for this is on players. So for Bournemouth, a lot of their chances are sort of concentrated to the three attacking midfielders, being Semenyo, Tavernier, and Kluivert. So I think for me, the main target is Semenyo and Tavernier, just because Kluivert's sort of minutes are they're more difficult to predict. With Semenyo and Tavernier, they've been much more consistent this season, and I would fancy at least one of them or even both of them to play the full 90 in this game. I think both have very interesting. You can make very interesting points for both of them. So we'll start off with Semenyo. This season, he's had at least three shots in every game, averaging 4.8 shots per game on average, which is pretty ridiculous numbers. Um, Most recently, he had four shots, two on target, and a disallowed goal against Liverpool. But I think the sort of bit that stands out for me is he didn't play the full 90, which was the first time this season he was subbed early. Not entirely sure why. Maybe could have just been sort of tactical change. Didn't seem to be injury related. Um, but in that game, Tavernier did play the 90. And he actually seems to have potentially a safer minutes floor than Semenyo. If we look at his minutes, he's played at least 80 minutes in every league game so far, and he even started in the EFL Cup game against West Ham. So I think that suggests to me that he is one of the key players under Iraola, potentially on the same sort of level as Semenyo. So is going under the radar a little bit. In addition, Tavernier is the allocated free kick taker, um, and he's quite effective at taking them. I think most of the time when he does take them, you sort of see him get them on target. He's a good player from that in that sort of regard. If he has a sort of safe minutes floor, I actually really like his shot on target price of Bet365. He's currently 1.8 to register a shot on target, and considering that's landed in 5 out of 6 games for him so far in all competitions, including the start against West Ham, I think it looks a really good price. The only game it's failed is Liverpool at Anfield, which we can sort of forgive him for. Very tough matchup. Against Southampton at home, I think it's an ideal matchup to back shots here in this game, and high quality chances too. So again, 1.8 for a shot on target looks a solid price. For Semenyo, he's obviously quite a bit shorter, given how I think he's registered the most shots in the league so far, which is pretty ridiculous. So yeah, I do think the value is in Tavernier, although Semenyo seems to have a sort of safer floor in that regard, but he is noticeably shorter. Again, probably worth waiting for sort of other books to open up. I doubt anyone will be higher than 365, but worth the wait, I would say. Another thing that I'm interested in is the foul markets for this game. So Southampton obviously are going to persist with a possession-based style under Russell Martin, and I think in doing so, they've been a target for drawing fouls and drawing tackles. I think they draw a good matchup against Bournemouth, a team who like to press, a team who sort of favour a chaotic game, who will look to play on the break wherever possible. I think it lends itself to being quite high duels, and I think Bournemouth tackles and Bournemouth fouls are a pretty safe bet here. So if we're sort of looking into player data, there's a couple of players that sort of stand out for me. One being Cliver again. Obviously, I mentioned a bit of a risk with his minutes, but when he does start, his data is ridiculous. Last season he made the most fouls for Bournemouth, pressing from the front, pressing aggressively, and he's kept up that record this season with 5 fouls against Newcastle in his first start, before making 4 fouls against Chelsea and 3 fouls against Liverpool. So he sort of has the intent. If Southampton are going to see more of the ball, I really like his foul prices. If he can get more than 45 minutes, obviously he was subbed at the break against Liverpool, which sort of interests me. Maybe potentially into sort of first half foul prices could be an angle to go for, but I do think they'll be quite short. He's currently 1.72 for 2 fouls with Bet365, which is just about, I would say, backable as a single. You'd ideally look to be sort of pairing that with something. I do have a feeling though, Paddy Power do tend to open quite high on these kind of bets, so could be worth just waiting out for them. Again, this is just his data from player stats. 5 league games so far, two 2 fouls in 4 of those, including 26 minute off the bench against Forest. He made 2 fouls, averaging 2.66 fouls per 90 over the last 30 games. So he obviously won't, or likely won't get the full 90, but if he can get sort of 60 minutes against a possession-based team, really like his foul prices. Um, just underneath him, Lewis Cook has also been he's had a sort of very aggressive start to the season. 3 bookings, and he's made the most fouls for Bournemouth so far, playing as a sort of holding midfielder. He's a target. He's made at least 2 fouls in 4 out of 5. Again, he's accumulated 3 cards, and he's also priced at 1.72 to make 2 fouls. So again, decent matchup against a possession-based side. He'll likely be on the same sort of area of the field as Dibley, who's good at drawing fouls, adept at drawing fouls, likes to dribble, goes down pretty easily. So good in that regard. Um, but yeah, as I say, I like a few of the shot bets. I like a few of the foul bets, but it's worth waiting for additional markets to release because I think that's an important part of finding value, having that sort of odds comparison. Um, so let's be patient. But if you want some early prices, if you're sort of worried about price drops and things like that, could go for some of these prices with 365. I think the Harwood Bellis one will drop. I do think Tavernier will also drop slightly as well. As I say, I sort of tend to post my bets sort of day in advance at most, just to sort of shield my account and shield the accounts of people who follow as well. So I will be having a sort of more comprehensive thread on this game. So if you're not already, I imagine most of you are, but please make sure you're following me on Twitter um, for that, and I'll be posting all of my bets on Telegram as well with an advice taking plan. I think a bit of a change for me going forward is I'm going to focus on writing really high quality threads. So again, make sure to check that one out. Um, but that is all the games covered. So we covered 5 games. I will potentially have a couple more bets going out. You know, we are posting this on Thursday, still quite early, still quite a few markets to be released. So make sure you're following me on Twitter and Telegram. Um, thank you for all the questions. Thank you for those that are here still in the chat. Thank you very much for your support. Really, really appreciate it. Your comments and your interactions. So again, thank you for supporting, and I will see you all next Thursday. So goodbye and take care.